Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first real session of series 2 of The Real Business of Wine. And we're looking back, it's a logical thing to do, at what has happened over the last 12 weeks, really since we started, just under. And we've got two experts here. We have Professor Simone, who's a great friend from Geisenheim University in Germany, who's got some research data that comes both from Germany and indeed from Burgundy and other parts of Europe, as to how the virus, how the pandemic has affected those European regions. And then we have Rob McMillan, another old friend from the Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, who should be known to everybody who's interested in wine anywhere because of the SVP report, which comes out annually. And there is also a blog and other things that go in between times, and which actually drills down into what's happening in the US wine industry, and both in terms of US wine production, but also in terms of the market in general. So I think we should be in for a lively hour. And I'd like to kick things off by inviting you, Simone, to say, what is it that you've been finding, and not just you, but you and other colleagues elsewhere have been finding has been the impact of wine in Europe over the last, on wine in the last 2-3 months.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be joining your group again. Well, what we've seen is, of course, when consumers were restricted in the way they can buy wine, this of course affects producers, how they can sell wine. This is the main thing. And what we can see in Germany is gastronomy, hospitality was basically closed. There was a restriction in where you can buy your wine in specialty retail. And there was a big winner, and these were the supermarkets where wine sales increased a lot. So this is the main takeaway. And of course, we have less wine tourism. And so the direct cellar door sales it decreased, but the producers, the small wine estates, have been quite well able to balance this by direct shippings, by selling wines per post order, or by driving the wine to the consumer.
So that's a very different situation to, for example, Italy, where there was a time where they weren't able to do that. So that opened out over time. How, in terms of selling wine directly, Rob is going to, I think, he's got great insight into how that happens in California, but it's not the same in Germany, is it? The way that wine is actually distributed.
Wine, I mean, historically, the wine estates depended very much on private clients coming to the wine estates twice a year, filling up the trunk of their car and, you know, buying wine, very loyal from one producer. This, of course, changed. And there was one mantra of the last years in Germany, and this is, well, you're successful if you manage to sell your wine in high gastronomy, if you manage to sell your wine in specialty wine retail, and if you manage to do exports. So there were a lot of, you know, first-class wine estates doing this route. And the bad thing is, you know, these were very heavily affected over the last couple of months because these were the routes that were closed. And those wine estates that still depended on those private clients that became old, you know, they were less loyal. They became lazy in going to the wine estates and rather doing the easy thing and buying it in the supermarket. Funnily, those old dinosaurs, they were the winners because they still had the base of direct customers where they could, you know, activate their address books and sell, you know, send out an email, send out a leaflet. And I just spoke to someone offering basically a business software and who can very easily see wine estates, what they sell. So there was one of the larger ones I spoke today, and he basically said they've never seen such a change in small wineries becoming big ones based on turnover and large ones losing a lot over the last weeks. And this is really depending on what is your route to the market, and if it was depending on direct wine sales, you were the winner. If it depended on the specialty wine retail, you were the loser.
And so just also, before we move across to Rob, there isn't really a history in Germany of people subscribing to being members of clubs and having wine arrive every month or 2 or 3 months. And secondly, the tasting room concept of a sort of a tourist place. It's coming, and has been coming for quite a few years in Germany, but it's not the same as what we see in Napa or Sonoma as being an entertaining place to spend time, is it?
Regarding your first question, Rob, indeed, wine clubs are kind of unknown in Germany. I know this very well from Australia and, of course, from the US, but this hasn't really grounded in the market here in Germany. I don't know why that's the case. It's because maybe wine is available everywhere, and it's a small country, so you can easily drive to a wine estate and get your wine. Regarding the cellar door experience, I fully agree that historically we had wine tourism, and of course, the Mosel Valley is a key example of that, where in the shoulder season you would go there in spring or in autumn. You would spend a week there doing some cycling tours, and of course, you would also see a wine festival. You would enjoy just the landscape and also visit some wineries. But it has almost always been a combination of vacation plus visiting a wine estate. Regarding entertainment, indeed, that has been a key success factor of the last years. Sorry, we still have some old-fashioned wine estates. If you enter, you don't really know if it's the 70th or the 80th, and you still have these old German writings on there, and you feel, they have fallen out of the time. But there are now very modern tasting rooms where they really are successful in having this event, having entertainment. But of course, they lost in the last weeks because they weren't allowed to sell wine, to taste wine.
Thank you. So Rob, the very different picture of locked down California.
Yeah, it's actually a little bit of the opposite. We've had channel shifting here. And we have a large number of wineries and a practiced hospitality, tourism, and entertainment. We've been talking about experience as part of the value quotient in the industry here for quite a long time. On March 15th, though, we had lockdown orders, and that shut down the tasting rooms. And it also closed all the restaurants. So the typical winery had not direct restaurant sales, but restaurant sales through a wholesaler. And then they had their tasting room, and that represented somewhere around between 43 and 50% of revenue. So they woke up one day and it was quite a shock, for everybody. We didn't really know, what to do. We have in Silicon Valley Bank, we have roughly 475 winery clients, and they all needed help right then. So it was quite amazing, and nobody really knew, obviously, what was going to happen. But there's a few basic principles that I hold to, and one of them is that wine is recession proof. Recession resistant. And so I believed early on that it would be virus resistant economically anyways. And in fact, that has turned out to be true. What you saw in the United States is wine started to sell like toilet paper. I'm not sure how it was in Europe, but well, interestingly, sidebar, I was actually in Hong Kong in early February and taking pictures of the hoarding of alcohol products and things like that, and only to share on Facebook back in America so I could show people how different it was. And of course, I fly back home and I'm right back in the middle of it again. But that's what happened with wine, is wine ended up being hoarded, just like toilet paper, but out of the grocery store. So, and another interesting thing is that somewhere around 75% of wine is sold through the top 13, the largest 13 producers in the United States. And so those guys all had phenomenal results. They were up dramatically. Wine is roughly up in both grocery and drugstores about 30% during the COVID period. Versus the beginning of the COVID period, anyways, for the small wineries, it was down 40, 50, 60%. This is horrible. And interestingly, even though we have a consumer that's premiumizing still, looking for better quality wine, the lesser quality, higher manufactured, higher production wines, those are the ones that are in the grocery stores, and the distributors stopped, they stopped all of their promotions. Why should you? The stores actually had to close early to restock. So even though the consumer really wasn't demanding that quite as much as better quality wines, it was those lesser quality wines that weren't being discounted. And then you go to all the many small producers, and some of them are discounting 20, 30, 40% because they've just got to raise cash to survive. Very, very different. And economically, again, that's the wine that consumers desire. So the channel shift was remarkable because while the producers in the United States, they were selling less than 3% through their online. I have a chart, but I won't go to it. I'll try to stay chart free if I can. I think it was somewhere around 16% by the time we got to the beginning of June that was coming through online. Now, that doesn't mean that they became gifted in online tactics. What it means is that they were passive and they happened to have a shopping cart on their website, and consumers wanted their wine. They might just be, they're stuck at home. And that's the gigantic consumer shift. We haven't had that happen since the 1960s or 1970s, where couples or families, they're all at home at 5 o'clock at night, and it's time to eat dinner. A lot of our country they've lost a lot of their cooking skills. Some love it still, but many have kind of lost those, and we're forced to cook, forced to go to the store, forced to figure. So interestingly, we've actually seen growth in demand. Go back to January, it was pretty much zero. It was like flat growth. And, you move to the current period, and it's hard to exactly pin it down, but it's somewhere between 5 and 10% growth now. And some of that's going to stick.
Ollie, you had a question.
I have a few questions because there's a lot to unpack between both of those data sets. So we had Eric Asimov on last season, and one of the things that he talked about and wrote about is that consumers during lockdown were returning to what we would describe as comfort items, comfort shopping, comfort drinking. And that there was not only an emotional element of comfort to that, but it fell into two other categories, which, and this kind of goes beyond some of what Eric was saying, but what we've learned from talking through so many people. So you also had the issues of convenience, which when not everyone was set up, I mean, Paul Mabray talks about it as digital debt, right? They weren't capable from day one of selling, but we've got Walmart, whether we like them or not, who they are capable of selling, right? So we have a convenience factor that's now moving into digital. And then we also have a confidence. So here we are in this time of massive crisis across the board, and we aren't looking to explore. We want something that we know what it's going to cost, we know what we're going to get, we know it's going to arrive on time, and again, just this perfect storm that lends itself toward large retailers dominating the sales front for a period of time. So for both of you in the different markets, how much is this this characteristic of purchasing going to stick? And if we can put on our Johnny Carson fortune teller hat for a moment, for how long? When do we finally begin to feel safe enough to now branch back out into risk taking and purchasing from new shippers and new retailers? So we'll go the other way. We'll start with Rob, and then we'll work to Simone on this one.
Well, so lots of questions in there, but so first, I don't quite agree with the premise fully that people were buying for comfort. I do agree with the premise that people were buying things that were available when they walk into the grocery store, and that's the only place you can go. And it happens to be the brands that are large and established. That's what you buy, and a lot of people have interpreted that as that people are buying comfort brands. And if that's your conclusion, then the end of that is that it'll unwind because you're buying it out of fear. If that's what you actually believe. I'm not so sure that is exactly what happened. I think that people were buying brands that they recognized to get by. And I do expect to see some of this unwind. Obviously, with now in the United States, we have wineries that are just starting to open up in all of our regions again, with 50% less seating and social distancing and masks and sanitizer and all that stuff. So it's a different experience. But we already are starting to see that shift today out of the grocery and drug channel. Restaurants will obviously pick up a piece of that as well, having been closed. So that is a major piece of it. Safety plays a role in it. I think that's why you do have, what's the connection between toilet paper and wine? That's a good party question for you, but they were both hoarded. Because there is a safety component to it. But wine is a pretty complex category, and you can see what's happening with the demand and that passive growth in online from the producer side. I didn't mention, but the retailers that do have digital, they're up over 300% consistently every single week. So they're just doing phenomenally well. Now, what's going to stick when this ends? Businesses are already suggesting that, they don't need to travel anywhere near. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to get on a stage again, right? I might have zoomed myself to death now, and for the rest of my career and my speaking. So travel's going to change. Conventions are going to change. Being at home is going to be more normal for a lot of people. We're going to see a number of consumers that are going to leave cities that are expensive and go to less densely populated areas because that's safer, right? And if you look at New York City, that's the worst spot in the United States because everybody is concentrated. They're on public transports. You're going up and down elevators. So we have a lot of changes that are going to stick for sure. And so to the extent now that we actually can market and sell to a consumer that is at home and on the terms, the features that are important to them. And it probably gets, when you talk about safety, there's safety in families. No matter how you define a family, your household. And so when we start to talk about that, figuring out how to get into the mind of the consumer and being with their family again. And for decades, that's the way wine was marketed. I mean, there's a lot of ways it was marketed, sex appeal and other things too, but occasions and family was a part of it. And so if we're thinking forward, that's some of the changes we have to make as marketers.
Simone, how do you see it from Europe?
Well, from Europe's perspective, I can mainly first talk about Germany. And I would agree with Rob that I wouldn't say that people were afraid and changed the way they bought wine. I believe the main driver was really about availability and easiness to buy things. And I wouldn't say that they only choose things they really knew very well. I heard from some specialty retailers, because some people couldn't travel to Italy for their Easter vacation they had planned, well, they actually afforded themselves a 100 euro Italian wine they usually would not have bought. So we could also see some adventurism, but that was really much dependent on how safe you were at home. In a sense, did you have to care for a couple of kids who couldn't go to kindergarten and school, so you were really busy, then maybe you were not as adventurous and had no time to look for new wine things, compared to when you were safely at home, you had to do your home routines, you had a lot of time to browse the web. And that's what we could see, again, similar to the US, is online sales rose dramatically. I mean, that's things what people will stick to. They will get routine in buying wine online. They have new routines in how they find and discover wines. I believe this will stay for a while.
How did the discounters, I mean, that's something that you don't really have, well, certainly in the States to the same extent. We do in the UK, thanks to Germany, but the Lidls and the Aldis of this world have a huge bearing on the wine market in Germany. How did they fare, do you think, in this period?
Well, data we have available from Nielsen, because the German Wine Institute buys it, say that wines sold through retail increased by 8%. Of course, this is again channel shifting, because this is taken away from on-premise where there was no wine sold. I don't really know the difference between a normal supermarket and discount. What we have now is actually a strict order of how many people can stay in the shop. So you have queues in front, and they are basically counting the numbers of people, and only as much leaf can go in. So you kind of try to reduce your shopping trips, and wearing the masks, it's not as much fun. It's really what you have to do. You don't go shopping because you enjoy the time. It's really because you need and require something. I believe that there hasn't been a huge, tremendous amount of more wine sales than, around Christmas period. I mean, from the large bottlers, they are the winners in Germany. They were basically had the business like Christmas period, because this was the channel that was available. But if you look at the wine estates, again, there are about 50 have normal sales, because they managed to shift their sales to their mail orders, or to driving out the wine, or to selling it through online stores. We have about a quarter that lost, and a quarter that gained new volume. So again, this is, people were home, they still have full income. We have quite a tight social security net in Germany. So the unemployment only starts to increase slowly now. So people had money, they had time, so they were looking out for new wines. And this is really what we can see in the online stores.
And just before we just move back to Rob for a second, you've got some data for other parts of Europe outside Germany, don't you?
Yes. Well, what we hear from France, this is from the European Wine Market Observatory, is that French wine estates, they lost 70% of sales in April, because their channels they use are basically blocked. And part of this is, of course, exports. France and Italy and Spain, they have only a small home basis. So only few of the wine volume they actually produce is drunk in the market. They strongly depend on sales through the export markets, Asia, America, the rest of Europe. This has basically declined first through the import tariffs in the US. That was the first hit to French producers. That hasn't really hit the Italians so quickly. And then, of course, the restaurants play a huge role in France, and they've been closed since March. if you look into Italy, all of these countries had a big bumper harvest in 18. That's part of it is still in the cellars. They had a normal harvest 19, and they couldn't sell the harvest, and the new grapes are already ripening. So all of these countries have done very extensive lobbying with the European Union to basically, get the wines out of the tanks, to free them.
Now, do we have, forgetting COVID for a second, it hasn't gone away, and we've hopefully passed the peak, but we're certainly going to see more. But the financial impact, I've just been listening to the news in the UK, where the UK economy looks to be shrinking by 25%, which is unimaginable to any economist. But we're going to have we're going to have impacts, if you like, at various levels in various places at a time where there is a lot of wine sitting in tanks, yes, needing to be sold. Is this a perfect storm in terms of people who haven't got much money buying wine from people who desperately need to sell it cheaply? And does that place a lot of stress on the people who actually do want to sell a premium wine at a profit, at the sort of profit they're looking for? Rob, I'll throw it to you. Rob, you're the banker. Have any thought on this?
Yeah, we talked about this in the State of the Industry report in January, but I don't look at it as a perfect storm. If you're a grower in the United States, then yeah, it is, because you don't have a contract. And if you do, you probably, like Napa Cabernet was 10,000 a ton, and I don't know exactly, if you could get a contract, it might end up being 3,000 a ton, 4,000 a ton. Sonoma County Pinot Noir, is going to be very difficult to sell, and has been. Bulk wine is difficult to sell. It's the same thing in the United States. We had huge 18, and that was driven by really an overestimation by the wineries about how much they could sell. So we have too much, and we also have a boomer consumer that's not drinking as much. They still got plenty of money, but they can't spend on volume like they used to. They can't drink as much. That's the bottom line. And then the young consumer that is coming into their own now and large, but we haven't really identified very well with them. And yes, they're frugal, but there's a lot of other marketing components that we've totally missed the boat on in the United States, which makes them actually spirits consumers. One serving of wine is about 1.5, 1.75 times more than a serving of spirits. So that frugal consumer is going to gravitate towards spirits. They're wine aspirational in my mind, but this is a time where, at least when it comes to quality, some of that juice is getting actually shoved down into lower priced wine. It's not that everybody is discounting. You're not taking, a first growth wine and say, oh, I'm going to cut it in half. Those kind of changes happen slow. And I do think they are going to happen, by the way, but they happen slowly. And instead what you do is you produce smaller volume, and then you sell your juice into something else that disappears. And that young consumer might get that, special bottle of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir for, $12 US that, could have been $60 what's in it. But, that kind of a thing gets a young consumer, an early consumer, to go, hey, I like wine. And once you start drinking good wine, as we all know, you can't go backwards. So I do think it's actually a positive for where the industry is headed.
So Rob, you brought up boomers, and we've long read in your SVB reports about the boomers versus the millennials. And since they're talking about the millennials right now, I'd actually like to talk about the boomers. I don't know if you've had a chance to accrue any data about them, but our understanding is that late adopters, specifically the boomer generation, have finally had to embrace online grocery shopping as a result of everything that's happened. And the trickle-on effect is expected to be adoption of e-commerce throughout now a variety of consumer purchases. Do you see this impacting those numbers that year on year you show us about how boomers are buying wine or how millennials are not buying wine? Do you think that the boomers are finally going to up their e-commerce spend?
Yeah, to be direct, you know, this behavior changes. I'm one of them. You know, I buy on Amazon all the time. You know, but not groceries. I mean, for me, I want to go to the grocery store. I want to go pick up my produce. I want to go pick up the meat. I don't want somebody to do that for me. But you know, in this time, couldn't leave, and I didn't want to fight the lines at Costco in the United States. So just waiting outside 6 feet apart, everybody's holding their carts around the corner. That's a waste. So, you know, we use Instacart here, and it's free if you're over $100. And except once, they delivered, now they're delivering our groceries within 3 hours. It's like, so now I'm like, well, why the heck would I ever want to go to Costco? So yeah, I think the bottom line is for, it's not just boomers, it's for any of the late adopters. That really, over here, the grocery purchases were not significant. This has just sped up the kind of adoption we all knew was coming. You know, it's the Amazon effect that has just been, you know, you see it in shopping malls in the United States that are going to be much more empty than they were before. And you see it across a broad range of retail. You know, Walmart's making tremendous strides over here in they're going direct, and they started out late. So yeah, we're going to end up with a lot more of that.
Can I now, the sort of one of the, again, huge differences between Europe and, well, I say Europe outside the UK, but particularly mainland Europe and the US, is the breakdown between branded wine and private label, or very, very weakly branded, if you like. So if I go into a store in Germany, there are not very many strong, what I'd call, I mean, the wine business isn't big on brands compared to spirit brands and other brands anyway, but in Germany, I don't see very many strong brands. What I see is, I'll see a French appellation or an Italian appellation, which might be a private label, or it might be from a producer, I don't know, but what I'm buying is that name, or indeed a varietal. In the States, I've been recent times, I've seen a move towards private label through companies like Total and some of the other retailers that have seen an advantage in it, but you're still a much more branded market there. How do you see, especially with this, back to my perfect storm of lots of cheap wine being out there, how is that going to be impacted? How is that going to affect this breakdown between private label and brands, do you think? Simone, in Germany.
Personally, in Germany, you know, we don't have, or the producers don't have the margin to build up big brands and to communicate them and to advertise them, because wine is so cheap. You know, if you sell wine for an average €3 a bottle, or let's say maybe 4, and if premium starts as €5 a bottle, well, where's the margin for you to build up a brand? And what we saw is that, well, if the tanks are full, that means bulk wine is readily available. I believe that those producer brands will not have more money, but basically the large retailer brands, they can benefit from this. And this will not help private producers to really set up a brand and to have margin to communicate. The second thing is, of course, yes, we have volume, but I mean, we all know that economies will, you know, we will see the effects of the economies going down. Rob, you spoke about, you know, 25 degrees, which is unimaginable. I believe we will have a big increase in unemployment by the end of the year in Germany. And sooner or later, people will have less money in their pockets. So they will again decrease their spending. So the prices will decrease further. Personally, I believe this is the time for retailer brands, for large, you know, anonymous brands. It's not the time for communication making something new. I might be wrong.
Rob.
Yeah, I agree with Simone. It's not, I mean, starting a new brand right now is kind of insane, especially in the United States where we have, I don't know, hundreds of thousands. Right? So it's not like you need a new one. So that for sure. Over here, private label is, kind of a decade-ish new. And the growth rate in private label has been quite heavy. It's hard to find good data, but they've been able to get some pretty good data sets that suggest it's in the last 5 years. Each year it's been growing between 10 and 18% any given year. So we still see that growth, and that will continue. You have a frugal consumer, oncoming consumer. So supply and demand balances, prices in there somewhere, and that'll obviously impact it. We aren't seeing tick ups in price. People are very used to seeing price increase and volume increase in the United States, and we're not seeing it, and we haven't really. It's something I've been talking about now in the report for a few years, where we were headed, and in January we were there. We were kind of at zero, and although volumes are way up right now, overall in wine, price really isn't. And when you go back to the SKU, price isn't up as well. But private label is a big growth thing.
So one of the things I've been hearing is that because, as you've said, so much wine in America is distributed by so few people, so few big companies, for any other producer who's got reps going back on the road again now, going out to sell, if they've got wines from the five giants who are trying to make up their budget, they're trying to hit their targets for the year, and they're behind their targets for the year on some of those mid to low range wines, are the other wines going to get the attention from the sales teams that maybe they would like to have?
In the U.S.?
Yeah.
I mean, what's happening is we're just starting to unwind the lockdown. And first of all, there's just a change in behavior, I might add, that people aren't on the road. Travels, I don't know what they're doing, honestly. Are they Zooming with their, here, try this. It doesn't work very well. Although I saw Polly had a drink and she didn't share with me. Somehow we've got to figure out how to, we got to fix that next time.
I'm on water at the moment.
Yeah.
So my question is, are we going to see so much pressure from the giants to actually hit their targets for the year that everybody that everybody else is going to suffer even more than they ordinarily do?
The big companies are up significantly. I have one of my customers that sells in the $10 to $20 price points, and all through grocery. They don't have any restaurant and nothing direct. March, they were up 70% year over year, and it's a rather substantial player too. So, that's just to show you, what happens. There's one other thing though that's really important for people to grasp, and it's not talked about very often, and that is the content of the unemployed in the United States. We're all at record unemployment levels. You have to go back to the Great Recession to even get near. But the vast majority of the unemployed in the United States are blue collar. They're rank and file. They are hospitality. They're retail store managers, middle level managers that make less than $75,000 a year. So it's been interesting to see with this lockdown. I was thinking, okay, well, we're going to start to see a big drop in sales. And it didn't happen. And part of the reason that didn't happen is because it's the people that are employed are the ones that could work from home. The ones that didn't have to be, cleaning beds in hotels and that kind of thing. So, I think largely the American consumer, if you look at, who controls the money and who has the money, is actually going to come out of this okay. The stock market actually is even, as of day before yesterday, the NASDAQ was back up to record levels. I mean, go figure that one out.
It's an interesting question, because as that does raise a question globally in terms of the super premium wines, because when we go back to 2007, 8, 9, there were a lot of predictions of the death of the $200, $300, even $150 Napa Cabernet, whose prices have just gone up and up. And all sorts of predictions of bankruptcies galore of those wineries, and it didn't happen. And they've had a pretty good time over the last decade. Do you think this is still sustainable? Do you think we've got enough people who are going to go on buying wines at those sort of price levels?
No. I think that, most of the world looks at America and they go, "These guys are crazy." First release winery selling for $125 a bottle. That's nuts. But it's the wealth that was here, and maybe good provenance in terms of the grapes and such. But no, I think building brands is something that is decades, if not generational, and whether you're in Europe or the U.S. and some of the top appellations. We'll see who the real brands are now, and we'll always have the wealthy, we'll always have the top 5%, and they'll always be able to buy those kind of wines, and their idea about the utility of a dollar is very different from the person that's cleaning a room.
So
they'll buy.
Thanks, Simone.
But a lot of the other wineries below that are not going to be able to hold the price.
Simone, in Germany, you're famous for having some of the cheapest wines in the world, but it's a great market for some super premium wines. It's where you sell super Tuscans, you sell a lot of, I think the Chilean, top-end Chilean wines actually have quite a good market in Germany, for example. Do you see those, and it could be Burgundy, it could be any top wines, do you see those wines having a tough time in Germany, or do you think the people who buy those wines will still be insulated enough to go on buying them?
Well, what I've heard is that some of the super premium denominations like Bordeaux or Burgundy didn't see Germany as a top market anymore because they kind of moved to China or other ones. So I think we were somewhere in the middle. I'm not sure that in Germany it's only the blue-collar workers who will be hit, because we are a very export-dependent country. A lot of car production is down, machinery production is down. So there are kind of expectation that it will also be white-collar workers who will be hit. So there are some who expect it will also be the middle layer who will have less income. And this is after many years with very low unemployment in Germany, where we could hardly get anyone being employed. We were really depending on East European workers coming to our market. I believe it's also an occasion thing. Big money wine in Germany was something to show and to be seen. And if you're sitting at home and you drink your wine, you're not going to be seen. So it's about sharing it with your partners, with your clients. And if it's less possible, then I believe that these super premium wines will play a lesser role.
I think that seems to make sense to me. Rob, that's not showing off on wine's never been a problem in America, but do you think that might be something we'll see happening there? People not wanting to show off to friends who aren't necessarily doing as well as they were.
Yeah, it's a little different. The younger consumer here is very different from the older consumer. The older consumer, when they used to, my generation, we would wear Izod T-shirts, drive BMWs. We wanted to show our wealth conspicuously, and the young consumer doesn't like to do that. It's kind of an anathema to them, and yet they still kind of like luxury, but it's with a phone or an iWatch, but they do buy luxury, and they do splurge, but they save their money and they splurge, and then they, shop at a secondhand store for other stuff. So it's a long answer, but I do think that the young consumer will, share those nice wines. Friends are incredibly important to them, but I do think that they will show off. Yeah. when it comes to wine because of the social occasion.
Holly,
Rob, one of the things that our research has shown about the younger generations, which I'm going to describe as younger millennials, is that they are debt averse and risk averse, but that they will save their money and splurge on something that supports their own self-identity, their perceived self-identity. So what I'm wondering about this in the context of what you're saying, that idea that they will spend, and then what you said earlier about, the brand with a capital B, which is a bit anathema in many wine circles. Do we think that this younger audience is going to be looking for the wine you've never heard of, the most amazing, least known, really geeky wine, and that this is going to present a space for wineries who have not had a very loud voice to now actually market themselves more substantially?
Well, they already are. You see it all the time with some, in the United States, it's, Cabernet, Chardonnay, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and then who knows? and so the young consumer is looking for Mueller Thurgau or some thing like that, and because it's made by a reputable producer, and maybe it's less price. And so they're able to demonstrate their intellect and intelligence, by finding these good values. In my generation, we wanted to show how much money we had. That generation, they want to show how smart they are, which maybe is a better thing, right, at the end. So, I think it's going to happen. I think it will happen, absolutely.
Now, to me, across the world, what we've been hearing in the last 5-10 years is that discovery thing of these new wines and so on, that used to be the role of the wine critic, who would say, hey, I've got this exciting new wine from Spain or whatever. Then it was the sommeliers. It's been increasingly sommeliers over the last 5 years. Now, restaurants are definitely going to take a hit. Now, I've seen all sorts of predictions of how many restaurants are going to fail in the next 6 months. And that ranges from as many as a scary figure of 75% in the UK to anywhere between 30 to 50% in the US, because a lot of restaurants were not financially solid in the first place. So they're not really ready for this kind of change to the way they have to work. Do you think, I'll start with you on this, Simone, in Europe, because you mentioned France in particular, do you think that a problem for the restaurant sector, an ongoing problem for the sector, is going to cause even more problems for the wine industry?
Absolutely. I mean, what we've seen is that the restaurants have been very important to producers because they had a higher margin. So what I've heard, that you have to sell, more than double the amount you sold to gastronomy to retail just to make up for the margin or the return you had. You can't really have one unanimous vote for Europe, because some countries are particularly dependent on tourism. And so it's really depending of how quickly the tourism thing is going to start again. So if you look for restaurants in Italy or in France or even in Spain, they are really depending on, okay, all these North or Middle European cold countries coming to summer to the south and enjoying the time, drinking and eating. I think this will be the biggest impact volume-wise we see. If you look into Germany, for instance, I just read a statistics that about every second German wants to spend their holiday at home this year, which is extremely unusual because usually it's about 3 out of 4 that go abroad. So this is a chance for the German wine growers, wine estates, the cellar doors, but also the restaurants to benefit from domestic tourism. But only if it's nice and enjoyable, and you don't, or there's not a meter, how much distance you have to your neighbor, and you have to enter with a mask. It has to be an enjoyable time.
Thank you. Actually, while we're here, we've got a few more minutes, and in our audience, we've got Angela Lloyd in South Africa, and I'd like to invite Angela to say a few words. Because South Africa was a very different situation to anything that you've seen in Europe, or we've seen in Europe or in the US, because actually there were no sales of wine at some point. Angela, would you like to share your experience there and what's happened in the last few weeks?
Can you hear me, Robert?
We can, yes.
Okay. We had banning of the harvest when it was still undergoing at the end of March, which was, thank goodness, rectified. But then sales of alcohol were banned for export at one stage, but that was then rescinded. But locally, we could not have sales of wine. But when I say that, wine could not be delivered. And a lot of wineries, the private wineries and the independent retailers did offer wines that people could buy, some at discounts, but a lot of them not, so that they could pay their staff. This was a major reason, so that they could keep their staff on. And when the ban was lifted of delivery of wines locally on the 1st of this month, it was just amazing what percentage of wines have been sold. I mean, some people recorded between 200% and 300% increase in sales. The difficulty, of course, now is the actual delivery situation, as Amber was saying, in France. And that is because partly sales of wine are now allowed, but only between Monday and Thursday from 9 to 5. But it doesn't seem, here we are, what now, at the end of the second week of June, it doesn't seem as though the sales have sort of fallen off at all. They're still as strong as ever.
Thank you. That's very interesting, because I mean, it's a very different market to everywhere else. We're going to go into, obviously, what is going to be a very different time. One of the questions that's coming up a lot is whether we're going to be drinking more local, or eating and drinking more local. In America, President Trump has made a few efforts to stop people drinking as much European wine, certainly with the 25% tariff. Do you think that greater in the longer term, if I was coming to you as a banker, Rob, if I was coming to you, Simone, as a researcher, do you think, would you be betting on a future in which the wines in on my shelves at home are going to be more local, or there's going to be less going overseas? Or do you think that we're going to spring back to where we were in terms of people wanting to try wines from Georgia and Uruguay and everywhere else? Simone.
Well, I believe that in the short term, we might benefit from German domestic tourism and from people just staying at home. So there is this stronger exposure to German produce. I'm very hesitant in believing people's short-term, statements. Well, I want to support local, because they are very quick in forgetting about this and becoming very convenient. And if we see a major economic crisis, it will be mainly about prices and about income. And German wine production is just not as cost efficient as Southern European ones. So I expect a swing back to the old stage of A, price sensitivity, but B, well, if you can afford it, why? I grew up in communism and I was stuck in a country with a wall. And the first thing is we wanted to get out, we wanted to see the world. And I believe if this ends, all those young people who had plans to travel, with plans to spend their time abroad, they will do so. They will swing back in the old way of experiencing the world.
Thank you. And Rob, I'm going to add just an extra spin to the ball I've been bowling at you, which is that you have something happening in November this year, some kind of political event. do you, I mean, the rest of the world is watching with some interest. Do you see, would a change in administration have an impact on the wine industry, do you see? And by the same token, would a second term for Donald Trump have any impact in itself?
I doubt it. You know, if President Trump wins again, then you'll have a continuation of the same situation. I don't think politics particularly played a large role in success or failure. It's more consumer-based, economy-based, unless you want to give President Trump all the credit for the present economy. I think it would have been very different if we would have had a very left-wing socialist candidate on the Democrat side. If that would have happened, then I think you would have seen a rundown of the stock market, negative wealth effect. But you know, Joe Biden is actually more of a centrist as a Democrat versus Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren as an example. So I don't think for the wine industry, politics are going to play that much of a part. As far as the imports go, though, I think it's a mixed bag. So you know, very expensive, you know, wines out of Bordeaux. You know, the people that buy those, if it's 15% import, it's probably not going to matter. But that 15% when it's a $10 wine, it does matter because now you're talking about a consumer that's counting pennies. So it depends on how you're looking at it. But the other side, I'm supporting what Simone was talking about with the world traveler, the young traveler, everybody that wants to get out. If you can't get out, you can experience the world in your dreams with these wines. And so I think that there's certainly in the United States, I think the young consumer in particular is pretty much ambivalent to place. So it's on the wine retailer to figure out how to attract their attention and their fancy.
Thanks. Polly, you had a question.
Yeah, I don't think that with 2 minutes left, there's any way that we cannot confront not only the impact of COVID, but the impact of the past couple weeks in America and discuss that in the light of wine sales, wine marketing, our audiences, and representation. So we've talked all about COVID and lockdown, but now let's talk about the impact of wineries who by and large have maybe not been as representative. And in fact, I'm not going to even say maybe, who have not been representative of our audiences. And now it has been forced in front of them that they must service these audiences better and communicate better. Can we just end with some comments, because this is not just in America, on how we see this will change wine sales and wine marketing in the next 12 months and beyond?
Rob?
Yeah, so State of the Industry report, one of the things I talked about in there is differences between the boomers and the younger consumer, and one of them is ethnicity. It's not quite as homogeneous. It's not a European cohort, and so you know, when you look at as an example how Constellation is done, you know, they end up with a bunch of Mexican beers and tequila, and guess what? You know, that's taken off. Well, why do you think that? You know, it's because the consumer is there and established with tradition, and then that's grown and it's kind of spread. It's the way America always works. It's you know, you have different ethnicities and restaurants, and everything starts to become fusion. It's how things grow. But our wine community is you know, it's European. It's German. It's Swiss. It's Italian. It's French, and it looks that way when you look at distributors. When you look at owners, it's rare that you see African American, Persian, you know, I mean, pick any ethnicity. It's rare. So with this new consumer and the expectation, if you're gonna sell to a consumer, and it's in your best interest as a producer of anything to sell to the consumer, you're gonna have to figure out how to identify with that component of sales.
So economically, forgetting everything else, you really do think that we're going to see an impact in the short term that maybe we would have seen anyway.
Talking about in January. Yeah, it's just now it's just like this COVID thing this advances it up to a new height. We have the time to pay attention to it, and the world is paying attention to it, and I'm grateful for it. And we need to change as a world.
And Simone, obviously Germany, quite a different situation in some ways, but it is. And I'd also say, to be fair, I think the European wine industry is not just very white; it's still pretty male. In my experience, when I see women in the industry in Europe, they very often have the same name as the name of the company. They've inherited it rather than being appointed. Do you see inclusiveness both in every sense growing in, and obviously very specifically in terms of ethnicity at the moment, but generally, do you see inclusiveness growing in the European industry?
I believe it, particularly regarding gender, it has grown dramatically. If I look at our students in Geisenheim, historically it was the males, the boys that were sent out to take over the company. But now it's almost a gender split that we have sitting in our classes, and we have a lot of great examples of female winemakers, like Teresa Breuer taking over the company from her father, or we have now a great movie about female winemakers. I would say that we've been very far in it. We reached a very, very good goal there. Regarding ethnicity, of course, we had this huge immigration inflow in 2015 that we haven't really digested yet, and that brought up the right wing to new heights. And where we see that historically they come from countries and ethnicities that have not been very close to wine or liked wine, and that of course has an impact of the wine consumption we have in Germany. And we actually did a study on this in our institute 2 years ago, where we looked at wine consumption of Turkish immigrants, which came to Germany in the 60s. And where we see the first wave did not drink alcohol. The second wave wanted to be different from their parents, so they started to drink wine. And then the third generation wants to be different from their parents, so they get back to being more Muslimic. So there isn't a straight vector where things become homogeneous over time. I think we see that it's always a challenge. It's always stays interesting. But I would say that wine actually, from the consumption perspective, is a very female product, whereas the snobs are not female. So if it's about premium wine, we talk about males above 50. And regarding the values, I think that this will be difficult to change in the long perspective.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure that's a great high note on which to finish, but thank you very much, Simone, Rob. I'm certainly better informed than I was an hour ago. I'm not sure what I think is going to happen, but we'll be carrying on and watching this. I'd love to have both of you back as we move along in the next few months to see other things. But thank you also we now have a producer, Anya, which we didn't have before. And so we'll now be posting these videos on every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so 3 times a week. We're no longer doing the 5 times a week schedule because other people have got other things going on in their lives, and we're all trying to get back into the rest of our lives as well. But so please look out for those. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to Real Business of Wine to be kept informed of what's going on. But once again, thank you, Simone. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Polly, as ever. Stay safe.